Meghan Markle walked into a 60 Minutes interview expecting to explain her side of the story. Instead, the conversation quickly turned into a series of difficult questions from Anderson Cooper. What began as a calm discussion about her life, public image, and experiences with the royal family gradually became a disagreement over how her public statements should be examined. Cooper pressed for specific answers, while Meghan pushed back against what she considered unfair questioning. The key moment came when the discussion moved from her personal experiences to the claims and decisions she had already discussed publicly. Meghan argued that she was being treated unfairly. Cooper maintained that he was simply asking the questions that any journalist would ask when serious claims are made in public. As the disagreement continued, Meghan's frustration became increasingly clear. Cooper did not change his approach, and Meghan eventually reached a point where she questioned whether she wanted to continue the interview at all. So what happened inside that interview that turned a routine conversation into a heated exchange? And why did Meghan ultimately decide that she had enough? This is the story of how a planned 60 Minutes conversation became a confrontation over accountability, privacy, and the limits of public storytelling. Anderson Cooper has spent decades interviewing politicians, public figures, and people at the center of major controversies. His approach is usually straightforward. Ask the question, listen to the answer, and follow up when something remains unclear. That approach becomes especially important when the person being interviewed has already spoken publicly about the same subjects many times. Meghan Markle has also spent years discussing her experiences as a member of the British royal family, her decision to step away from royal duties, her relationship with Prince Harry, and the media attention surrounding their lives. Through interviews and other public projects, she has presented her perspective on what happened and why she made certain decisions. In this dramatized scenario, those two approaches meet during a 60 Minutes style interview. Meghan enters the conversation prepared to discuss her experiences and explain how she sees her life today. Cooper begins with relatively straightforward questions, giving her an opportunity to explain her position in her own words. But the tone changes when Cooper begins asking follow-up questions about statements Meghan has previously made publicly. Instead of simply moving from one topic to another, he asks for clarification, examples, and explanations. Meghan maintains that some subjects are deeply personal and that she should have control over what she chooses to discuss. Cooper's position is different. He argues that once a person makes important claims publicly, reasonable questions about those claims are part of the interview. That disagreement becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Anderson Cooper began with one of the most important decisions in Meghan Markle's recent public life, leaving royal duties and building a new life outside the institution. How would you describe your decision to step away from royal life? Cooper asked. Meghan explained that the decision was about gaining greater independence and having more control over her own choices. She described the experience as difficult and said that leaving allowed her to create a life based more on her own priorities. Cooper listened before asking a follow-up question. But you left an institution that came with enormous public attention, and since leaving, you've continued to appear in documentaries, interviews, podcasts, and other public projects. Do you think you've actually reduced the attention surrounding you? Meghan drew a distinction between unwanted attention and attention she willingly accepts. There's a difference, she explained. I can choose when I want to speak and what I want to share. Cooper acknowledged that distinction but continued. I understand that. But when you voluntarily discuss your experiences in public, doesn't that also mean people will have questions about those experiences? Meghan said that choosing to tell her own story did not mean she was agreeing to every form of scrutiny. Cooper responded that he wasn't suggesting she had to accept every type of attention. His point was simply that public statements naturally lead to public questions. It was a reasonable exchange, but it established the central disagreement that would shape the rest of the interview. Meghan wanted control over her story, while Cooper wanted to examine the story she had already chosen to make public. Cooper moved to another issue that had become closely connected to Meghan's public image. Her repeated decision to discuss private experiences in interviews and documentaries while also expressing a strong desire for privacy. You've said that you wanted greater privacy after leaving royal life, Cooper said. But you've also spoken publicly about your relationship, your experiences inside the royal family, and the reasons behind your decision to leave. How do you reconcile those two things? Meghan explained that there was an important difference between privacy and control. Privacy doesn't mean I can never speak about my own life, she said. It means I should have the choice about what I share. Cooper acknowledged that people have the right to decide what parts of their lives they want to discuss. But he wanted to clarify something else. So the issue isn't necessarily whether your life is discussed publicly. It's who decides what gets discussed and when. Meghan agreed. Exactly. I can choose to tell my story. What I object to is other people deciding what my story is. Cooper then followed up. But once you choose to make certain personal experiences public, isn't it reasonable for journalists and the public to examine what you've said? Meghan maintained that there was a difference between reasonable questions and intrusive coverage. Cooper agreed that distinction mattered, but pointed out that his questions were based on statements Meghan had already made publicly. I'm not asking about something you never discussed, he explained. I'm asking you to explain something you've already chosen to make part of your public story. That answer changed the direction of the conversation. Meghan clearly wanted to maintain control over how her experiences were discussed, while Cooper was focused on examining the information already placed in the public record. The disagreement was still relatively calm, but the issue was becoming clear. Where does personal privacy end when someone voluntarily makes their experiences part of a public narrative? Cooper then moved to Meghan's criticism of the royal institution and the experiences she had described since leaving it. You've spoken about feeling isolated, unsupported, and uncomfortable within the institution, he said. Those are serious experiences. What specifically made you feel that way? Meghan explained that she had entered the royal family expecting one experience and encountered another. She described the pressure of public life, the expectations placed on her, and the difficulty of adjusting to an environment where almost every decision could receive public attention. Cooper listened before asking a more direct question. But you knew you were entering a very public institution. You were also an established actress who understood media attention. How much of that environment could you realistically have anticipated? Meghan replied that knowing something would be difficult was not the same as experiencing it personally. I understood there would be scrutiny, she said. What I didn't expect was the level of hostility. Cooper then asked what she meant by hostility. Can you give a specific example of what you experienced? Meghan hesitated before explaining that many of the experiences were personal and difficult to revisit. Cooper acknowledged that, but returned to the broader issue. I'm not asking you to revisit every painful moment. I'm asking because you've made these experiences an important part of your public explanation for why you left. If we're going to understand that decision, shouldn't we also understand what specifically happened? Meghan maintained that the overall experience was more important than individual incidents. Cooper responded that individual examples were necessary to understand the larger claim. The conversation had now moved beyond Meghan's decision to leave. Cooper was asking her to explain the foundation of the criticisms she had made publicly, while Meghan was increasingly concerned that the questioning was focusing too heavily on details she considered personal. For the first time, the interview began to feel less like a discussion of her experiences and more like an examination of the claims surrounding them. Cooper then raised one of the most serious subjects Meghan had discussed publicly, her allegations concerning racism within the royal family. I want to be careful with this because these are serious claims, Cooper said. You've spoken about concerns involving race and comments related to your son. Can you explain specifically what happened? Meghan's expression changed. I've already spoken about this, she replied. It's extremely personal, and I don't want to go through every detail again. Cooper acknowledged that the subject was difficult, but continued with the question. I understand that. But when a serious allegation is made publicly, isn't it reasonable for a journalist to ask for clarification? Meghan said that she should not have to identify every person involved or repeat painful conversations simply to satisfy public curiosity. Cooper clarified that he wasn't asking her to discuss anything she had never mentioned. He was asking about claims she had already chosen to make public. You've suggested that members of the royal family made comments concerning your child's appearance and race, he said. If that's part of the public discussion, people naturally want to understand what happened and who was involved. Meghan replied that protecting the identity of the person involved was important to her. Cooper then raised another question. But by keeping the identity private while allowing the allegation to remain public, doesn't that leave other members of the family under suspicion? Meghan said that protecting someone's identity was a personal decision and that she did not want to cause further damage. Cooper responded that he understood the intention, but argued that vague accusations could create uncertainty for everyone involved. The exchange became increasingly uncomfortable. Meghan felt that Cooper was questioning her credibility rather than listening to her experience. Cooper maintained that he was doing the opposite, taking the allegations seriously enough to ask for clarification. That disagreement became a turning point in the interview. For Meghan, the questions felt personal. For Cooper, they were basic follow-ups to a serious public claim. Cooper then shifted the conversation toward Prince Harry and asked how much of Meghan's public story could be separated from her husband's experience. "Let's talk about Harry for a moment," Cooper said. "A large part of the story you've shared publicly has involved both of you. Your decision to leave royal duties, your documentaries, and many of the discussions about your experiences have been presented as a shared journey. How much of this story is uniquely yours?" Meghan responded that she had her own identity and her own experiences. "Of course I have my own story," she said. "But that doesn't mean I have to discuss my husband every time I talk about my life." Cooper agreed that she had the right to set boundaries, but continued with another question. "I'm not saying you have to discuss him. I'm asking how we understand your public journey without acknowledging how closely it has been connected to his." Meghan explained that her individual experiences existed regardless of her relationship with Harry. Cooper then pointed out that many of the major public events surrounding her had involved both of them. "You've spoken about leaving the royal family as a couple. You've discussed your experiences together. You've produced projects together. So when you say you want to discuss your individual experience, what specifically would you separate from Harry's story?" Meghan paused before answering. "I think people are capable of understanding that I am my own person." Cooper said he agreed with that in principle, but wanted to understand the distinction. "Then what is the part of this story that belongs specifically to you?" Meghan explained that her experiences within the institution were personal and that she should be able to discuss them without turning every conversation into an examination of her marriage. Cooper accepted the point but noted that public storytelling naturally creates questions about the broader context. The exchange remained controlled, but Meghan was becoming noticeably less comfortable. Cooper had moved from asking what happened to asking how she wanted the public to understand the story she had already presented. And that distinction was becoming increasingly important as the interview continued. Cooper then moved away from the royal family and toward Meghan's professional projects after leaving royal duties. "You've announced several major projects since moving to the United States," he said. "How would you describe the progress of those ventures?" Meghan explained that she was focused on creating meaningful work and building projects that reflected her interests. "We're working on projects that are important to us," she said. "The goal has always been to create something positive and useful." Cooper followed up. "Can you give me some specific examples of what you've produced and what you've learned from those projects?" Meghan mentioned her documentary work, podcasting, and other creative plans. She emphasized that building a new business and media platform takes time. Cooper then asked about the expectations attached to those projects. "You've had major partnerships with established entertainment companies. When those partnerships don't continue, what do you think went wrong?" Meghan replied that projects change and that the entertainment industry is unpredictable. Cooper acknowledged that, but pressed further. "Is it possible that some of these projects simply didn't perform as expected?" Meghan said that success could not always be measured immediately and that there were many factors behind a project's outcome. Cooper then asked whether she believed outside criticism of her work was sometimes justified. "I think criticism is easy when people don't understand what happens behind the scenes," Meghan replied. Cooper responded that he wasn't claiming to know everything that happened behind the scenes. "That's exactly why I'm asking," he said. "If a project doesn't succeed, isn't it useful to examine why rather than automatically assuming the criticism is unfair?" Meghan became more defensive. "I don't think everything needs to be treated as evidence that we failed." Cooper clarified that he wasn't saying every unsuccessful project represented a personal failure. He was asking whether public figures should also accept responsibility when a professional venture does not work. The discussion had now reached a familiar point. Meghan viewed the questions as another example of unfair scrutiny, while Cooper saw them as reasonable questions about publicly announced projects. And the more he followed up, the less comfortable Meghan appeared with the direction of the interview. By this point, the conversation had moved well beyond the opening questions. Cooper had asked about Meghan's decision to leave royal life, her public claims, her privacy, her relationship with Harry, and her professional projects. He then returned to a pattern he believed was becoming clear. "There's something I've noticed throughout this conversation," Cooper said. "Whenever I ask a question that challenges your explanation, you describe the question itself as unfair." "Why?" Meghan looked at him carefully. "Because the questions aren't neutral. There's a tone behind them." Cooper remained calm. "I'm asking about things you've said publicly. If something I've asked is incorrect, I'm happy to hear your explanation. But calling the question an attack doesn't answer it." Meghan said she felt that journalists often approached her with assumptions already formed. "You're not coming into this simply trying to understand me," she replied. "You're looking for contradictions." Cooper acknowledged that looking for inconsistencies was part of journalism. If someone makes several public statements over a period of time, isn't it reasonable to compare them and ask about differences? Meghan disagreed. There's a difference between asking a question and trying to prove someone wrong. Cooper responded that his purpose was not to prove her wrong. "My purpose is to understand what you're saying. But understanding sometimes requires difficult follow-up questions." Meghan maintained that she had already answered many of the questions in previous interviews. Cooper pointed out that repeating an explanation did not necessarily resolve every issue. If the same question keeps coming up, perhaps it's because the previous answers haven't completely addressed it. That response clearly frustrated Meghan. She argued that constantly revisiting the same subjects prevented her from moving forward. Cooper said he understood the desire to move forward, but added that moving forward did not mean avoiding legitimate questions about statements that remained part of her public narrative. At that moment, the disagreement became much clearer. Meghan believed the interview was becoming an examination of her character. Cooper believed he was simply testing the explanations she had already given, and neither appeared willing to change their position. The conversation became noticeably more tense when Meghan challenged Cooper directly about the way he was conducting the interview. "I came here to have a conversation," Meghan said. "Not to be treated as though I'm on trial." Cooper remained composed. "I'm not putting you on trial. I'm asking questions about things you've discussed publicly. But the way you're asking them makes it feel like you're looking for something wrong with everything I say." Cooper paused before responding. "If I ask you about a statement you've made, and you disagree with the question, that's fine. But disagreeing with the question doesn't make it an unfair interview." Meghan said that she felt the questions were becoming increasingly personal. Cooper explained that the subjects were personal because Meghan herself had made many of them part of her public story. "You've talked publicly about your experiences, your family, your relationship, your treatment by the institution, and your professional work," he said. "I'm asking you to explain those things. That's what an interview is." Meghan disagreed. "You're not listening to what I'm saying. You're waiting for an answer you can challenge." Cooper replied that challenging an answer was sometimes necessary. "If I accept every answer without asking a follow-up, I'm not really doing my job." Meghan's frustration became more obvious. "You keep saying you're doing your job, but you're ignoring the human being sitting in front of you." Cooper answered that taking her experiences seriously was exactly why he was asking for clarity. "I'm not questioning whether your experiences were difficult. I'm asking you to explain the claims you've made about them." Meghan said she did not believe she owed anyone a detailed explanation of every painful experience. Cooper agreed that she had control over what she chose to share. But once you decide to make something part of a public discussion, people are going to ask questions about it. You don't have to answer every question, but you can't reasonably expect every question to be comfortable. The exchange had now become a direct disagreement over the purpose of the interview. Meghan wanted the conversation to remain focused on her perspective. Cooper wanted to examine that perspective through follow-up questions. Neither side was backing down, and the interview was approaching its breaking point. The disagreement reached a point where Meghan no longer appeared interested in continuing the conversation. She looked toward the exit before turning back to Cooper. "I don't think this interview is going anywhere," she said. "I don't feel that I'm being treated fairly." Cooper remained seated and answered calmly. "You're free to stop the interview at any time. But I want to understand what specifically has been unfair." Meghan said that the repeated questioning had made the conversation feel hostile. Cooper disagreed. "I've asked you about your decisions, your public statements, your projects, and the experiences you've discussed yourself. Those are all reasonable subjects for this interview." Meghan responded that she had already explained her position many times. "And I understand that," Cooper said. "But giving an answer in another interview doesn't mean I can't ask you about it here." Meghan shook her head. "I came here expecting a serious conversation, not an interrogation." Cooper replied that a serious interview sometimes required difficult questions. If the questions are uncomfortable, that doesn't automatically make them unfair. Meghan then said that she had reached her limit. "I think we're done." There was a brief pause. Cooper nodded. "That's your decision." Meghan began gathering her belongings, but before she moved toward the door, Cooper asked one final question. "Would you say you're leaving because you believe I've been unfair, or because you don't agree with the questions I'm asking?" Meghan looked back at him. "I think the two are connected." Cooper replied that there was an important difference. An unfair question can be challenged. A difficult question can simply be difficult. Meghan did not appear persuaded. She moved toward the exit while Cooper remained calm. The interview had not ended because of one particular question. It had reached this point because the disagreement over questioning itself had become the main subject. As Meghan prepared to leave, Cooper knew there was one final exchange still to come. Meghan stopped near the door and turned back toward Cooper. The interview was effectively over, but neither side appeared ready to leave the conversation without making one final point. Cooper spoke calmly. "Before you go, I want to make something clear. I haven't asked you questions because I assume you're wrong. I've asked because you've made these subjects part of your public story, and I think people deserve to understand them." Meghan replied that she believed the interview had crossed the line from questioning into judgment. "I came here to explain my experience," she said. "Instead, I feel like I've spent the entire time defending myself." Cooper nodded. "I understand that's how it feels to you. But there's a difference between defending yourself against an accusation and explaining something you've said publicly." Meghan said that she had already explained enough. Cooper answered that she had every right to decide when she no longer wanted to answer questions. But leaving doesn't resolve the questions. It simply ends the conversation. Meghan maintained that she was not obligated to continue an interview she considered unfair. Cooper agreed. "You're not obligated to stay. But if you believe your story is accurate, difficult questions shouldn't necessarily weaken it. They should give you an opportunity to explain it more clearly." Meghan paused for a moment. "You've already made your judgment," she said. Cooper shook his head. "No, I'm asking questions. What people conclude from your answers is up to them." There was a brief silence. Meghan finally turned toward the door. "I think we've said enough." Cooper nodded. "That's your choice." She left the room, bringing the interview to an abrupt end. Cooper remained behind for a moment, reflecting on what had happened. The disagreement had never been simply about one question. It was about whether a public figure could control the discussion surrounding a story after choosing to make that story public. The interview ended there, but the questions it raised were only beginning. The interview ended without the clear resolution either side had expected. Meghan believed she had been subjected to unfair questioning, while Cooper maintained that he had simply followed up on statements and experiences she had already discussed publicly. The disagreement also highlighted a larger issue surrounding public interviews. When someone chooses to share personal experiences with millions of people, they can decide what they want to reveal, but journalists can still ask questions about the information that has been placed in the public conversation. In this dramatized scenario, Meghan's decision to leave became the final statement of the interview. Cooper's questions remained unanswered, while Meghan left believing that continuing would not produce the kind of conversation she wanted. So the question is not simply whether Anderson Cooper was too persistent. It is also whether Meghan had a reasonable right to end an interview when she felt the questions had become unfair. What do you think? Was Cooper doing his job by continuing to ask difficult questions? Or should he have changed his approach once Meghan objected? Share your opinion in the comments. And if you found this story interesting, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more celebrity interview stories and media discussions.